At 4:18 in the afternoon, alarms rang across the southern Caribbean. The Arleigh Burke class destroyer USS Knights, a $1.8 billion warship bristling with 96 vertical launch cells, suddenly found itself targeted by an approaching contact. A Venezuelan patrol ship, small by comparison but closing fast, had turned sharply off its course and accelerated straight toward the American destroyer. In minutes, the distance collapsed. 5 nautical miles, then 4, then 3. Radar operators called out headings, electronic warfare suites lit up with signals, and deck crews rushed to defensive stations. The Venezuelan vessel had surged from 12 knots to more than 22, a dangerous speed for a close intercept. On the bridge of the Knights, every option was considered. Hail in English and Spanish, log the data, hold fire but prepare for escalation. The situation was no drill. The USS Knights carried SM-2 and SM-6 missiles, capable of intercepting aircraft at Mach 3.5 and striking surface targets far beyond the horizon. Yet against a patrol craft only a few miles away, none of those weapons could guarantee restraint. One mistake could ignite a regional confrontation. This was not a random encounter on open seas. It was a deliberate maneuver meant to test the boundaries of American resolve. Was this simply a reckless provocation, or Venezuela's attempt to challenge the U.S. Navy head-on in the Caribbean? At 16:20, the first hail went out from USS Knights. Broadcast on both loudspeakers and encrypted radio, the message warned in English and Spanish that the Venezuelan patrol vessel was closing at unsafe speed and had to change course. The reply was silence. By 16:23, the patrol craft had accelerated to 20 knots, its bow slicing hard into the sea. White wake frothed against the blue Caribbean as the intercept geometry became clear. The trajectory pointed straight at the destroyer. Inside the Combat Information Center, operators tracked the approach with precision. The AN/SPY-1DV phased array radar refreshed every 4 seconds, showing the contact closing relentlessly. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite intercepted bursts of encrypted radio traffic, short, clipped, impossible to translate in real time. Long-range electro-optical cameras locked onto the target, magnifying sailors moving on deck. Some crouched near the bow as if preparing equipment, others stood still with hands gripping railings. At 16:25, the range fell under 3 nautical miles. At that speed, less than 6 minutes remained before the vessels would meet bow to bow. On the Knights, 25mm Mk-38 autocannons were loaded and manned, though safeties remained on. Gunners steadied their hands on the grips, scanning the horizon through optical sights. Nearby, sailors donned helmets and body armor, strapping chin straps tight as alarms echoed through the steel hull. The destroyer's captain held the ship steady. Orders came crisp and calm. Record all signals, hold fire, prepare to launch the Seahawk. On the flight deck, the MH-60R Seahawk sat armed and ready. Its twin General Electric T700 engines were capable of driving it at over 140 knots, carrying sonobuoys, Mk-54 lightweight torpedoes, or AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. But today, its purpose was different: to put eyes directly on the patrol craft and to show Venezuela a visible line that must not be crossed. At 16:27, the patrol ship held its speed at 22 knots, the intercept course unchanged. Another hail went out, again without reply. In the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer counted down aloud. Range 2.7 miles, 2.6, 2.5. Operators scribbled every detail into logs, knowing the data would be reviewed in Washington within hours. Tension thickened across the decks. The Mk-38 gun crews rehearsed in their heads the sequence if the order came. Shoulder harness locked, safety off, squeeze, and hold. Missile technicians checked the readiness of the vertical launch system, even though everyone knew the intercept geometry was too close for a missile solution. Deep in the engineering spaces, crews monitored the 4 General Electric LM-2500 gas turbines, ready to surge speed or cut hard to port if collision became imminent. At 1629, the Venezuelan vessel showed no sign of reducing power. Its bow wave grew taller, its angle steady as a blade. Through binoculars, sailors aboard the Knights saw figures gesturing on the patrol craft's deck. The meaning was unclear. Some pointing forward, others raising arms in agitation, but the intent was obvious. The charge was deliberate. The destroyer now moved to a higher posture. Weapon hatches on deck were cracked open. Sensors were shifted into combat mode, and the Seahawk's flight crew scrambled into their seats. A green light flickered on the bridge, signaling the helicopter launch sequence. Every sailor understood the stakes. Just weeks earlier, U.S. forces had sunk Venezuelan vessels linked to smuggling networks. Caracas had vowed revenge. To many on board, this felt like the moment that promise would be tested. At 1631, the executive officer gave a sharp nod to the captain. The decision came without hesitation. Launch the Seahawk. On the flight deck, rotors began to spin, slow at first, then faster, thumping the air with growing intensity. Sailors crouched against the rotor wash as the helicopter's engines roared, its nose dipped forward, sensor turret glowing as it powered up. Meanwhile, the Combat Information Center pulsed with urgency. Range 2.3 miles. Closing. The voices were clipped, each syllable echoing against the metal walls. A tactical display showed the geometry, the patrol craft pressing inward, the Knights holding course, the Seahawk lifting to draw a line in the sky. For the crew, the danger was visceral. A patrol craft might seem insignificant against a destroyer, but at this speed, even a glancing collision could rupture fuel tanks or cripple radar arrays. Worse, a hidden weapon, an RPG tube concealed under tarpaulin, a shoulder-fired missile, could emerge in seconds. Everyone knew how narrow the margin had become. Yet the discipline of the U.S. Navy held. No trigger was pulled, no missile fired. The destroyer's crew embodied the paradox of overwhelming power, prepared for violence, yet committed to measured restraint. At 1632, the Seahawk lifted free of the deck, climbing into the humid air. Its rotors chopped across the waves as it turned toward the Venezuelan ship. The moment of first climax had arrived, the point at which the next move would decide whether the standoff remained a test of nerves or exploded into combat. The crew on board the Knights braced themselves. Every screen, every optic, every weapon was trained forward. The helicopter surged ahead, casting its shadow across the sea, and in that silence before escalation, one thought ran through every mind. The next minutes would show whether America's restraint would be enough, or whether the Caribbean was about to see its first clash of steel and fire. While the Seahawk blades chopped the Caribbean air, decisions were being weighed a continent away. In Washington, the Situation Room filled with maps, live feeds, and tense voices. The USS Knights transmitted every second of telemetry. Radar plots, radio logs, electro-optical images of the Venezuelan patrol craft charging on its intercept. For the president's national security team, there was no ambiguity. This was deliberate, a probe to test how far America would bend. At 1634, the duty officer briefed, Venezuelan vessel accelerating, range 2 miles, repeated hails ignored, Knights maintaining course, Seahawk preparing to launch. The room fell quiet, the hum of air conditioning competing with the crackle of encrypted radio. A chart on the wall showed how fast the patrol ship could close the remaining distance, less than 6 minutes. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs reminded everyone of the rules. The destroyer was in international waters. The United States had the right to freedom of navigation. The Venezuelan action was unsafe, but it was not yet an armed attack. Opening fire too soon could turn a dangerous encounter into a regional war. Yet waiting too long risked humiliation, or worse, collision and American casualties. This was the knife edge of deterrence. The United States could project overwhelming force. FA-18S on carrier decks nearby, long-range bombers on alert in Florida, submarines prowling under the sea. But the White House recognized the larger truth. Raw firepower mattered less here than discipline. A single burst of gunfire might sink a patrol boat, but it would also feed propaganda in Caracas, painting Washington as aggressor. So the decision came down firm, but restrained. The Knights would not yield its course. It would not fire unless fired upon. The Seahawk would launch, execute non-lethal deterrence, and record everything. Every angle, every signal, every evasive move by the Venezuelan ship would be captured in high definition. And later, if Caracas claimed harassment, the US could roll the footage before the world. At 1636, that guidance was relayed. Maintain lawful transit. Log all hostile actions. Execute non-lethal deterrence. The Navy's ethos of professionalism was on display. Strength without recklessness. For the crew of the Knights, those orders mattered. They knew that even thousands of miles away, Washington had their backs. They also knew the message this encounter would send. America's power was not just in the missiles below deck, but in the ability to stand firm, absorb pressure, and respond with precision instead of panic. And as the Situation Room confirmed the course, one reality hardened. Venezuela's gambit would be met not with weakness, but with a demonstration of American resolve. Clear, recorded, undeniable. At 1637, the roar of rotor blades filled the sky above the USS Knights. The MH-60R Seahawk lifted off its deck in a controlled surge, nose dipping forward as it gained speed. Twin T-700 engines spat exhaust, and the churning wash whipped sailors' uniforms against their bodies. From the destroyer's deck, the helicopter banked low over the waves, sensors already locking onto the Venezuelan patrol ship. The Seahawk was not just another aircraft, it was a flying arsenal, carrying an electro-optical turret capable of magnifying a target's bridge until individual crewmen could be identified. Its laser designator, usually meant for guiding Hellfire missiles, could also fire a visible green beam, non-lethal, dazzling, and impossible to ignore. That beam was the U.S. Navy's next card to play. At 1638, the helicopter cut across the Venezuelan ship's bow, steady at 200 feet altitude. From the turret under its nose, a bright green laser swept the bridge windows. The beam did not burn or blind permanently, but its effect was startling. Anyone looking directly toward it saw a blinding wash of green that made instruments hard to read. The intent was unmistakable. A warning line had been drawn. At the same moment, the Seahawk's loudspeakers boomed across the water, repeating the same message in English and Spanish. You are closing at unsafe speed. Alter course immediately, or you will be treated as hostile. The words rolled over the waves, amplified by the helicopter's external PA system. On the Venezuelan deck, movement shifted. Sailors who had been standing near the bow suddenly pulled back. Some shielded their eyes from the green light. Others raised hands in visible gestures of non-hostility, a sign that they understood the meaning even if they refused to reply by radio. At 1640, the first signs of retreat became clear. The patrol craft's engines throttled back. Speed dropped from 24 knots to 22, then 19. Its bow eased slightly off the direct intercept vector, a subtle but unmistakable change of heading. What minutes before had been a hard charge now softened into a wary shadowing maneuver. On the bridge of the Knights, the crew logged every second. Radar confirmed the slowing speed. The SLQ-32 registered reduced emissions. Long-range optics caught the Venezuelan sailors retreating from exposed positions. All the evidence aligned, the pressure was working. Still, the Americans did not let their guard down. The Seahawk held position off the patrol craft's starboard quarter, laser occasionally flashing across its bridge as a reminder. Gunners aboard the destroyer remained in place, fingers hovering close to triggers but disciplined. The rules of engagement had not changed. Fire only if fired upon. But the Navy knew restraint required visible strength. At 1642, the Venezuelan ship finally broke its silence. Over VHF radio, in accented English, came a terse broadcast: "This is Venezuelan Navy Patrol. We are exercising sovereign patrol rights. You must alter course." The reply from the USS Knights came swiftly, steady, and firm. "This is United States Navy warship operating in international waters. Your maneuvers are unsafe and being recorded. Alter your course immediately." The exchange captured the essence of the standoff. Venezuela framed its intercept as sovereignty. The United States framed its presence as lawful freedom of navigation. Neither side yielded verbally, but only one had the power to enforce its stance. By 1645, the outcome was clear. The Venezuelan vessel turned more noticeably to starboard, drifting away from its intercept. The distance opened to 4 nautical miles, then 5. The Seahawk circled once more, laser sweeping the waterline, then broke off to return to the destroyer. Its rotors thumped overhead as it flared and landed back onto the flight deck, sailors rushing to lash it down. For the crew of the Knights, relief was muted but palpable. They had faced down a fast-approaching vessel without firing a single shot. Every camera had captured the sequence: the aggressive turn, the unanswered hails, the acceleration, the helicopter launch, the laser, the retreat. Washington would have its proof. Caracas would have its warning. And yet, nobody on that deck doubted the danger. A patrol ship might seem small compared to an Arleigh Burke destroyer, but it carried risk in close quarters. Collision alone could have disabled systems, spilled fuel, and caused casualties. A hidden weapon, fired in the last second, could have escalated beyond control. The fact that it ended without violence did not diminish the seriousness. It highlighted how narrow the margin for error had been. As the sun began to dip toward the Caribbean horizon, the USS Knights resumed its steady course. The Venezuelan vessel lingered in the distance, shadowing, but no longer charging. Both sides had made their point. The Americans demonstrated that their destroyer could not be bullied. The Venezuelans signaled they would not remain passive after U.S. strikes against smugglers earlier in the month. The question now was whether this encounter represented the peak of tensions or only the first of many confrontations yet to come in these contested waters. By the time the Venezuelan ship faded back to 9 nautical miles, the USS Knights had proven its point without firing a single round. The destroyer never altered its lawful course, never yielded to provocation, and never lost control of the situation. Every moment was recorded: radar tracks, radio logs, and full motion video from both the ship and the Seahawk. In future debates, there would be no ambiguity. The world could see exactly who closed, who ignored warnings, and who backed away. For Washington, this encounter was more than a maritime inconvenience. It came less than 2 weeks after American forces had struck Venezuelan vessels involved in human smuggling and narcotics trafficking. Caracas, humiliated, sought to reassert itself by pushing naval patrols dangerously close to U.S. warships. The tactic was not random. It was calibrated brinkmanship: harass without firing, challenge without crossing the line into open combat. But the United States had an answer. Not with panic, not with gunfire, but with disciplined escalation. A $1.8 billion destroyer armed with nearly 100 missiles showed that sometimes the strongest weapon is restraint backed by overwhelming capability. A single Seahawk helicopter, flashing a green laser across a bridge, achieved what barrages of shells might have done, forcing the adversary to break off, yet without sparking a war. The figures told their own story. The Knights carried SM-2 missiles reaching 90 nautical miles, SM-6 interceptors climbing to Mach 3.5, Tomahawks striking land targets 1,000 miles away. The Seahawk itself could carry Mk-54 torpedoes and Hellfire missiles. Against that backdrop, a patrol ship with modest armament stood little chance. The imbalance of power was obvious, yet the U.S. Navy's decision not to unleash that arsenal was equally deliberate. It showed confidence, not hesitation. Strategically, the message could not be clearer. America would not be intimidated in international waters. It would operate where law allowed, and no regional power, no matter how aggressive, could change that by intimidation alone. For allies, the encounter was reassurance. U.S. ships would stand firm, recording every threat, responding with professionalism. For adversaries, it was a warning. Push too far, and the restraint you count on may end abruptly. As darkness settled over the Caribbean, the USS Knights pressed on with its mission, steel hull cutting calmly through the waves. Behind the calm was a truth every sailor knew, that peace on the surface was maintained only because America was prepared for war beneath it. This standoff may have ended without fire, but its echoes will shape future patrols. The Venezuelan Navy had tested the line and found it unyielding. The United States had demonstrated that it could project power with a steady hand, that its dominance was not just measured in missiles, but in discipline. One fact remained undeniable. When the Stars and Stripes flies from a U.S. warship, no challenge goes unanswered. So remember this moment, not as a skirmish, but as a message. A green laser over Caribbean waters was not weakness. It was the quiet strength of a nation that knows when to hold and when to strike. And for those who wonder what comes next, one truth stands. If America is ever forced to answer with fire, the response will not be a warning beam. It will be decisive, overwhelming, and final. This has been Military Power. Like and subscribe for more untold stories from the front lines of strategy and strength.